it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. Welcome to the Holiday Foliage block of the month. I am excited to kick this off. We're going to have a few videos to supplement and just demonstrate some of the components of the 12 blocks of this quilt. So with your initial shipment, of course, you'll be getting parts of the pattern, and I want to call your specific attention to that because in the very beginning of that, I'll just turn the page here, we give you some framework of things that may be new to you, or maybe you've done that in the past, or it's been a while, or this is a different approach to that. Specifically how to make a square under square. We go over that. I will also be going over that with you, and we'll be doing 3 separate videos for this program. How to make half square triangles, and they are of differing sizes in our quilt, but the approach to making that will be the same. And then we also go over how to make hourglass units. Sometimes people struggle with that. We have an approach here for you that's a slightly oversized, giving you a chance to square up. I love that. And we'll also be covering flying geese. I'll even touch just a touch on a simple 4-patch, giving you just a few pointers. So of course, you know you're going to be making each of the blocks twice. I love that. You can decide if you're going to, all of the cutting instructions are for both blocks, but you can decide if you want to be assembling them at the same time or make one and then make the other. So what I want to kick off with here today will be the block 1 and its counterpart, block 9 right here. And as we look at our pattern up in this corner, this is called the cat's cradle. And this is called a square in a square. And that's what we'll be going over today. You know, before I really take a deep dive into any patchwork, any piecing, where I'm like, okay, no applique, it's going to matter. Those quarter and seam allowances are going to matter. Those good clean cuts are going to matter. I kind of have almost a little bit of a checklist that I go through, and that's almost kind of assessing, all right, when was the last time I changed the needle on my sewing machine? I am absolutely guilty of not doing that on a regular basis. And it's such a low cost, but important component. Of course, we're not going to be able to use our sewing machines without them. The Schmetz Top Stitch 8012, you know, a pack of these, $6, $7, kind of in that range. Put a fresh needle in your machine if it's been a while. Just having that nice sharp point is just going to make things flow so well. I'm also very guilty of not changing my rotary blade in my rotary cutter enough. And of course, we want good, clean cuts. We're not having to go back and kind of recut that because it's kind of got a jagged edge. So these are some of the important things. And of course, sizing. I love to add sizing, especially if I'm going to be doing anything on bias. Patchwork pins. And my 2 new things that have been really helping me dial in the accuracy of my blocks are the seam guide setter. And this is really kind of a seam guide. You can use them in combination, or you can use just the seam guide to kind of set that ridge. It's on my machine. You'll see me using this. And also the diagonal seam tape. That's also on my machine all the time now, whether I'm doing piecing or not. So those are just some of the things as I'm, you know, also gaining more experience as a quilter, as in piecing in particular, that are helping me be really successful. So I want to mention that. For the cat's cradle, as we kind of dive into that, we've got our checklist, right? We've got the fresh needle, the fresh blade, good cuts. We're ready to go. That's just showing you this part of this right here. And you can see that initially with our beautiful black floral here, this just started off with a square and we cut that on the diagonal. Put one of those aside for over here when you're making the next of that. Of course, there's going to be 4 of those in each of the block 1 and again in block 9. So that's where that first cut is coming from. So right away, we have that bias. We talked about that just a moment ago. That's where sizing really helps you. Add that to your fabric, iron it smooth. Now you're making a cut and it gives the fabric just a little bit more stiffness so that there's a less resistance to this bowing on you and maybe being distorted. And also obviously good pressing straight down and not this action of lateral movement. That also helps to keep bias in the right shape and not get deformed. Over here, this is just a simple square. This right here started off with a square similar to the black but smaller, and again cut on the diagonal. Now in this instance, we're going to use both of those, whereas here, of course, we put one aside. So let's just lay that out and look at the mechanics of how this will need to go together. And that's how it's going to be constructed. So we can see we, of course, need to construct this first, placing those right side together, and right away that 1/4" seam is going to come into play and be very important that we're sewing an accurate 1/4" seam. So right away you can see I've got the diagonal seam tape, my seam guide, a nice ridge, and let's sew a 1/4" seam. We'll press to the outside. So I always like to, I've sewn too many things together in the wrong order. I like to lay it back down, get another visual, and say, okay, I can see here, I need to put that in this corner. I'm going to sew probably from the back side, a little easier to see that. Might even put a pin in. And again, a 1/4" seam. Pressing to the outside. I like to trim away a little bit of that, those little flaps right there. Some people call them dog ears, whatever you want to call them. And now that triangle is going to stack here. Now you might be tempted to sew on this side, but why I'd like you to actually flip that over is that X right there. Your needle needs to pass there. And now I have a visual. I have a target here. We're also going to pin here and here because we've got bias happening. When bias can have a mind of its own if you don't, use some stabilizer to help to control that and pin it well. And of course, we know we need to be a little gentle on that ironing. So we don't want anything kind of bowing. So we're well pinned. Let's unpin, and I can see with all of this confluence of seams and nothing here as we say, okay, how to press this, you can see how that seam is already path of least resistance, right? That's a law of nature. And fabric is not an exception. It is very much wanting to press toward that because there's no resistance there. Here on this other side, I have nothing but resistance with those seams. So we'll give that a good press. And that is a cat's cradle block. Just trim off those little dog ears. And of course, now you're going to make 3 more of those, and you already have one of those to get started. And we'll repeat that. Of course, the center of our block is just a beautiful square showcasing that lovely point setup. But here on the square in a square, how we will start that off. Another one that's going to involve some bias, so sizing again would be definitely a great thing to do here. So we have our center A, and then we have our 2 fabrics here. These will be once again cut on the diagonal. And we will place them, and that's included in the initial part of your instructions. So if you ever I don't remember how Jennifer said that, That's why keeping these initial instructions all throughout the journey of your block of the month are great, because we do give you a refresher how to do that here. But of course, that's why I'm here with you today, is to talk to you how to get that accomplished here. Let me put that out of the way. So we know that on one side, well, let's just look what this is going to look like, right? We know that it's either, and let's just look at that. Red's on the top, on the upper block. This is what we're going for. That's what we got to get accomplished. How are we going to do that? We know that we need to have this evenly on with the same amount of extension. I would recommend that you finger press this fabric. Don't give it a hard press, because then you'll just have to take that out later. You can either fold that. If you're comfortable with a friction pen, you could draw that line, but then you need to make sure you're erasing that away. A finger press is plenty. All I'm trying to do is have a visual line where the point of that triangle is hitting. That's all I'm trying to get accomplished right here. And I'm going to pin that. And let's sew a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to actually move my pin over so I don't have to remove that while I'm sewing. One thing I want to caution you about with the square in a square is to not sew with over 1/4 inch. If there was ever a time you wanted to sew with just a touch of what's called the scant, you've probably heard this term, this is a great time to do that. We want to make sure that all of those lovely points are not being clipped, because we sewed more than a 1/4 inch seam, right? If I sew more than 1/4 all the way around, this thing's going to come in just a little bit. So when we end up squaring this, we're kind of clipping all of those. So if there was ever a time to do that, that is now. And that's where the seam guide setter is great. If you're curious about this product, be sure to check out that Notions video where I've showed you how to use this, and it works with any sewing machine. A great tool. For square and a square, I like to work on opposite sides. It works better that way. And again, I'm going to give another finger press. And on the opposite side, now we've got a green. Once again, I'm going to position that, pin that, sew the 1/4 inch, and press to the outside. So let me do that. I'll be right back. And now we look like this. And I should have mentioned before we kind of dove deep into this, we have a few spots left at the time of this filming in the holiday foliage. So if you have a friend, maybe they've seen your quilt blocks, or they just missed out, could have been out of town when we were having our signups, let them know. Grab their spot. You can also contact BOM, which is Block of the Month, BOM at shabbyfabrics.com, and check with our Block of the Month team if you're not finding that product on our website. And maybe there's a spot for you. So I wanted to mention that if you're perhaps watching this and you're not in our program. And hey, if you're watching this, subscribe. We have all kinds of amazing products and projects, tutorials of all things, DIY quilts, table runners, and more. And it's a great way to get some tips and techniques and learn to use new tools. So notice how I folded it again in half this way, because once again now I need to find, where's that center line? Where am I lining up this other red fabric here, which we will sew a 1/4 inch, press to the outside. I will do the same thing with the green, press to the outside. When I come back, I want to square this up with you. I want to show you the sight picture you should see. And I want to give you some pointers whether you're using a square up tool or not using a square up tool. So I will get that sewn, press to the outside, and then we'll be ready to square this up. Okay, so now that we're here, we have made the block oversized, which is lovely, right? Well, of course, we want to make sure that we're a 1/4 inch away from these points. One of the things that I love about Creative Grid tools, and really any tool, is if I can find a mission specific tool where I get to square up on all 4 sides at the same time, that's my go-to. Sometimes we're squaring up to a very strange size and there is no such ruler. Here I have that. Here with the Creative Grid ruler, I can have, this is a 4.5, I've got this dashed line on 2 sides. I have a white line here and a white line here, making it lovely. I can just position this so that it hits here, there. Again, notice I scooted that over just a touch and just a touch, and I can see I should have sewn with more of a scant. Remember I said I didn't set up the scant, and I should have. I can see now I might just barely clip that point if I don't use a 1/4 inch seam allowance sewing the block, this portion into the bigger block. So this could be one where that scant 1/4 is really helpful. So we don't clip those points, right? So as I position this, I have a chance to square up around all 4 sides by simply trimming and turning. If you are using a ruler from home, of course, if this is going to be 4.5 inches, it's 2 1/4 from the center. So there is certainly a way to do that. It's just a little more cumbersome. There's my 2 1/4, 2 1/4, 2 1/4, right? And now I can see again, I need to be right there. I'm just barely touching that corner, but I'm just a touch, and that's why I should have sewn with a scant. That's okay. We're going to give that a trim, and now you would do that process all the way around. I'm going to take advantage of the Creative Grid tool, however. I like having that opportunity to square up on all 4 sides and not pick up my block. That is extremely helpful. Leads to more accuracy for sure. And now we have a square and a square. And that is going to happen in a couple of different blocks. So that, of course, all the construction of it here is very straightforward. You've got your rows. Of course, you're going to lay everything out. Pressing seams open, you might want to shorten your stitch length when you sew, press those seams open and sew those rows together. I'm at about a 2.25. Normally I sew on a 2.5. So I'm a little bit lower than normal when I'm sewing those rows together and then pressing everything open. All right, we will move right on in block 2. We also have the square and a square, so we won't recover that. It's the same exact measurement, same exact approach. And let's sew with a scant this time, right? And I think I already have that one off to the side. But there's a new technique in this one, and that's the hourglass block. Sometimes people struggle with that. I have an oversized technique I'm going to show you, and that will absolutely give you some beautiful, accurate side. We'll trim that up to 4.5 inches, and that'll go into the block just beautifully. So I'll see you back for block 2.